So now looking here, we're looking at sort of average living alumni. So we're sort of looking at comparing these two conferences and why, the Pac-12, uh, the PAC, I should say, there's not 12 of them anymore, but uh, they're not what they once were. And that's sort of the gist of the article, is that the PAC has a lot of great history, a lot of great tradition. There's a lot of, pride and accomplishment
Mhm.
that's happened in that conference. Oregon and Washington have had some high times, and Colorado has a national championship, and they have big markets. They've got big schools with lots of cachet,
Mhm.
academically and even athletically, historically. But if you start to look at what's been happening recently, the trajectory is not as strong. And this right here looks at the PAC and the Big 12, just comparing their total average living alumni. And this is just of the 2022 version. So that means the PAC still has USC UCLA. The Big 12 still has USC and UCLA. You look at the next column there, second column, with departures.
Mhm.
You see, well, the PAC's drops a little bit. UCLA is a very big big fan base and alumni
Right.
base. But you look at the Big 12, drops probably even more.
Mhm.
Texas has a huge, huge alumni base. Oklahoma's pretty solid. Um, Now you look at when you start adding in USC and UCLA, uh, and you keep the PAC the same, but you make these additions. That's a pretty decent bump to the total living alumni.
Right.
And when you add San Diego State and SMU, the very last column, to the PAC, it does drop the average living alumni per school down
Huh.
to close to 300,000, and the Big
Interesting.
12 is up around 250,000. So still the PAC has an advantage there. But then the question is, how engaged are those alumni bases?
Right.
Did they care about sports in the first place? Do they still care about it?
And
So
and two, when you look at UCF being such a new university, the average age of their alumni, I think, is late 30s, mid to
yeah,
late 30s.
got to be real low.
I think it's like
Huge.
I think it's 38 or 36, somewhere in that range.
uh,
I heard it the other day, but I can't remember the number.
Yeah, so they actually don't have a huge living alumni base, but
Right.
they're gonna have a
Right.
massive one, since the
Right. Which is where I was
enrollment's
going with that.
massive.
That's good. That numbers should get bigger. Should get bigger
Absolutely.
with UCF now. In Houston, we all know Houston's a really fast growing city.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I'm sure the university, and keep in mind too, when these schools get into a Power Five conference, they're going to gain exposure.
Mhm.
They will likely gain students, at least theoretically they should,
Yeah,
and so those numbers will go up for all four of those universities potentially.
I agree. I agree. If you want to pop that now, this is looking at just enrollments.
Hmm.
Okay, and so this is, where will your total living alumni number be in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? You have to have the high enrollments, and it's just undergraduate enrollments, partially because graduate students just aren't as engaged in
Hmm.
sports. They've already
Right.
been to an undergraduate institution. Unless they were there as undergraduates and stayed, they're probably more loyal to their undergraduate institution, is what tends to happen.
Right.
But that I just decided to look at undergraduate enrollments here. But again, same thing, changing through the years here. There was a pretty big disparity in the total enrollments, last year with,
Right.
before any movement. And you look at that, that number actually dropped for the Big 12 with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. The
Right.
enrollment down to just average of 20,000 total enrollments for the undergraduates at the remaining 8 Big 12 schools. Look at what happens when you bring in the 4 schools, and I think on the next slide we'll get to in a second. It seems like the Big 12 decision makers, the commissioner, and whoever was making the decisions on who to add, I think they really prioritize large enrollment schools because of the potential that brings
Right.
to total fans and alumni and viewers and fundraising and donors and all
Yeah.
those things. But it's pretty much a wash. You start out in 2022 and there's a pretty big disparity between the two. That's even with Texas and Oklahoma. You get rid of those two, and USC and UCLA leave. You add SMU and San Diego State. SMU is really small alumni base, really small enrollment. Very great institution,
Mhm.
Academically strong. It's pretty comparable to BYU as far as competitiveness to get into, endowment. There's a lot of correlations sort of between BYU and SMU from from an academic profile, but BYU's got a much larger enrollment, stronger football history, and just bigger stadium, more fans. But SMU does drag down their average a little bit in the Pac-12. San Diego State's got a decent enrollment, but again, it's pretty much a wash when you look at
Right.
the remaining 10 Pac schools and the 12 Big 12
Yeah.
schools.
It's very telling of something I hadn't thought about for sure. I mean, obviously, you hear about UCF all the time being either the largest or second largest
Yeah,
number
they're
of students
second.
in the country.
Yeah, second behind Arizona State.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty close between those two. I think they're close to 70,000. I think it's 67, 68,000 total total enrollment or undergrads. I forget exactly which number, and it might be in the next slide here.
So if Arizona State decides to jump to the Big
Oh yeah,
12,
those bars are going to flip.
definitely going they're going to flip
A little bit.
for sure.
Yeah, and again, I
Yeah, there it
apologize
is.
for the size on this.
It's okay.
But yeah, essentially, people can freeze there. I'm sorry if people are looking at this on a phone. It'd probably be very tough.
Yeah, they can click the link.
Yep, go to the
And
link.
find it. Yeah,
Essentially, you see the schools in red there, highlighted in red, San Diego State and SMU. Those are the potential ads, and just color coded by where the schools are. But you look at Houston, you look at the three biggest undergraduate enrollments for the new Big 12. They're three of the new additions: UCF, Houston, and BYU, all larger than Texas Tech for undergrads at least. BYU and Texas Tech are pretty close, but and in total enrollment, Texas Tech has more graduate students than BYU. But even Cincinnati, it's number 4. So the Big 12 highest undergraduate enrollments for the 4 new ads are in the top 5. So
Yeah.
That was definitely a priority when they were looking to add schools.
Interesting. Very interesting. Trying to find West Virginia on here.
Yeah, they're mid. Yeah, they're at the top of right below Oklahoma on the second part of
There it is. Yep, I see it now.
So, and again,
Cool.
I had these in big, longer graphs, and I had to sort of cut them and just put them into 2
Makes sense.
graphs, 2 different tables.
Right.
Here. And
Well
you can
done.
average numbers at the bottom there, and that this just correlates with the bar graph before as far as undergraduate enrollments. But looking at total alumni, looking at LinkedIn alumni, just interesting factoids. I don't know how massively relevant those things are, but again, alumni base does have a big factor.